The jungle of planet Kepler 442b was filled with strange sounds and deadly creatures Kim Tae-ho had never seen before. The young human cadet crawled through the thick mud as plasma fire burned through the trees above his head. His left leg was bleeding badly where the enemy blast had hit him, and every movement sent sharp pain through his body. The sounds of his alien squad mates were getting quieter as they moved away from the battle zone. Squad leader Veltar from the planet Zelthara had made his decision quick and cold when he saw the human cadet fall. The blue-skinned alien commander looked at Tae-ho for just 1 second before giving the order to retreat. Humans were new to the Galactic Defense Force, and many alien species still thought they were weak and not worth saving when things got dangerous. The squad had more important things to do than carry a wounded human back to safety. Tae-ho heard the last sounds of his squad disappear into the alien forest. He was alone, on a hostile planet with enemies searching everywhere. The young Korean soldier had been part of the Galactic Army for only 6 months and had never been in real combat before this mission. Everything the training officers had taught him seemed useless now that he was bleeding and abandoned behind enemy lines. The crashed transport ship nearby looked like his only chance for survival. Tae-ho dragged himself across the rocky ground, using his arms to pull his body forward. The metal hull had a hole big enough for him to crawl inside, where he found emergency medical supplies and some food rations. His hands shook as he opened the medical kit and tried to remember everything he had learned about battlefield surgery. Working by the light of a small emergency lamp, Tae-ho cut away his torn uniform to see how bad the wound really was. The plasma blast had burned through muscle and bone, but had also sealed some of the blood vessels, which probably saved his life. He used the medical foam to fill the wound and wrapped it tight with bandages. The pain was so bad he almost passed out several times, but he kept working until the bleeding stopped. Outside the wrecked ship, he could hear the sounds of enemy soldiers searching the area. The Krillians were known for being thorough hunters who never gave up once they found a trail. Their chittering voices and clicking footsteps came closer several times during the first night, but they never found his hiding spot in the transport. Wreckage. Tae-ho lay still and quiet even when the pain in his leg made him want to scream. The first day passed slowly as Tae-ho tried to plan what to do next. His communication device had been damaged in the blast, so he could not call for help. The emergency rations would last maybe a week if he was careful, but he needed to find a way back to the base before enemy patrols found him. The alien jungle was full of poisonous plants and dangerous animals that could kill him, even if the Krillians did not find him first. On the second day, Tae-ho started to understand that his alien squad mates were not coming back for him. They had probably reported him as killed in action and were already planning their next mission without him. The realization made him angry, but it also made him more determined to survive. No one expected a human to make it out of this situation alive, but Tae-ho was not ready to die on some alien planet far from home. He spent the third day making tools and weapons from pieces of the wrecked ship. A piece of metal became a knife and some wiring became snares for catching small animals. The emergency manual in the medical kit had basic information about surviving on hostile planets, but most of it was written for alien species with different needs than humans. Tae-ho had to figure out what he could eat and drink without getting poisoned. The sounds of searching patrols were getting closer each day, and Tae-ho knew he could not stay hidden much longer. On the fourth morning, he made a crude walking stick from a piece of the ship's support structure and decided it was time to start moving toward the base. The distance was over 200 kilometers through dangerous jungle, but staying in one place meant certain death when the enemy found him. That night, Tae-ho began his long journey home. He moved slowly through the darkness using skills he had learned as a child hiking in the Korean mountains. The alien forest was nothing like the woods back on Earth, but the basic ideas were the same. Stay quiet, move carefully, and always know where you are going. The stars above were strange, but his compass still worked, and he knew which direction would take him back to safety. Every step was painful and difficult, but Tae-ho kept moving forward through the night. When morning came, he found a place to hide and rest during the day when enemy patrols were most active. He ate small amounts of the emergency food and caught rainwater to drink. The wound in his leg was healing slowly, but infection was always a danger, without proper medical care. For 6 more days, Tae-ho traveled only at night and hid During the day, he learned to move like a ghost through the alien jungle, avoiding the creatures that hunted in the darkness and staying away from the paths where enemy soldiers might find his tracks. The other species always said humans were weak and broke easily, but Tae-ho had something they did not understand. He had the stubborn human refusal to give up no matter how bad things got. On the 7th day, Tae-ho saw the lights of the base in the distance. His legs were shaking from exhaustion and pain, but he forced himself to keep walking. The guards at the gate stared in shock when they saw the muddy, bleeding figure limping toward them. They had been told that Cadet Kim Tae-ho was dead, killed in action during a patrol mission. But here he was alive against all the odds that should have killed him days ago. The medical team could not believe what they saw when they examined Tae-ho. The field surgery he had done on himself was nearly perfect, and his navigation through hostile territory without any equipment showed skills they had never seen in such a young soldier. Word began to spread through the base about the human cadet who had refused to die when everyone expected him to give up. Lieutenant Colonel Park Min-ho was the highest-ranking human officer at the base, and he was very angry when he read the reports about what happened to Cadet Kim Tae-ho. The young soldier was recovering in the medical center, but Min-ho wanted to know why his squad had left him behind to die. The official report said that tactical necessity required the squad to retreat quickly, but Min-ho knew the real reason was that alien commanders did not think human lives were worth the risk. While Tae-ho lay in the medical bed healing from his injuries, he started reading everything he could find about military tactics and combat strategy. The base library became his second home as he studied the fighting methods of dozens of different alien species. He learned about their weapons, their weaknesses, and the ways they thought about warfare. Most of the galactic species relied on superior technology and overwhelming force to win battles, but humans had always fought differently. Sergeant Lee Hai-jin was the combat medic who had treated Tae-ho when he first arrived back at the base. She noticed that the young cadet was not like other soldiers who had survived terrible experiences. Most of them wanted to forget what happened and get back to normal duty as quickly as possible. But Tae-ho seemed to be using his time in the medical center to prepare for something bigger. During the long nights when Tae-ho could not sleep because of pain from his healing leg, he and Hai-jin would talk about combat medicine and survival techniques. She had been treating wounded soldiers for 5 years and had learned a lot about the weaknesses of different alien species. Their conversations covered everything from how to treat plasma burns to the best ways to move through enemy territory without being detected. Hai-jin started to understand that Tae-ho was not just recovering from his wounds, he was transforming into something new. The eager young cadet who had arrived at the base 6 months ago was gone, and in his place was a calculating warrior who missed nothing and forgot even less. She saw him studying the movement patterns of alien soldiers in the base and noting their habits and blind spots. When the medical team finally cleared Tae-ho for active duty, he was assigned to a new unit under Captain Choi Woo-jin, who was one of the few human officers who had earned real respect from the alien command structure. Woo-jin had been fighting in the Galactic War for 8 years and had seen many human soldiers come and go, but there was something different about this new addition to his team. The other members of Woo-jin's unit were a mix of different alien species who had worked together for over a year. They had their own ways of doing things and did not welcome changes to their established routines. A massive Draknari warrior named Gorak carried the heavy weapons and made jokes about how small and fragile humans were compared to his own species. A Telfari scout called Nixus was fast and clever, but thought humans were too slow and stupid to be useful in real combat situations. Tae-ho said nothing when the alien soldiers made their comments about human weakness. He just watched and listened, and learned everything he could about how they fought and what they expected from combat situations. His first mission with the new unit was supposed to be a simple supply run to an outpost near the front lines, but Tae-ho approached it like he was planning to assault an enemy stronghold. Captain Woo-jin noticed that his new soldier had changed during his time recovering from his injuries. The medical reports said Tae-ho had healed completely, but Woo-jin could see that the changes went much deeper than just physical recovery. The young cadet moved differently now, with the careful awareness of someone who had learned that death could come from any direction at any moment. During the supply mission, Tai-Ho studied everything about how his new team worked together. He watched how Gorak set up his heavy weapons positions and noted that the Draknari always chose the same type of cover. He observed how Nixus scouted ahead and saw that the Telfari followed predictable patterns when checking for danger. The alien soldiers were skilled and experienced, but they did everything by the book exactly the way their training had taught them. The mission went smoothly with no enemy contact, but Tai-Ho spent the entire time thinking about what would happen if they were attacked. He identified 17 different ways their formation could be broken, and 12 places where an ambush could be set up. The other team members noticed that the human was always watching and listening, but they thought he was just nervous about his first mission back from medical leave. When they returned to base, Gorak told the other soldiers in the unit that their new human teammates seemed jumpy and scared, which was exactly what he expected. From such a weak species, Nixus agreed that Tai-Ho did not seem ready for real combat, and suggested that he should be transferred to supply duties where he could not get anyone killed. But Captain Wu Jin had seen something in the young soldiers' eyes during the mission, something that reminded him of veteran Special Forces operators he had known that night in his bunk. Tai-Ho continued reading and studying, while the other soldiers relaxed or slept. He was learning everything he could about Krillian tactics and battle doctrine, but he was also studying the files on his own team members. He wanted to understand their strengths and weaknesses, just like he was learning about the enemy. Because Tai-Ho had realized something during his week alone in the jungle, being underestimated was perhaps the greatest advantage a human could have in this galactic war. 3 months after Tai-Ho returned to active duty, his unit received orders to investigate a series of attacks on supply convoys in the Kepler sector. 7 different shipments had been destroyed in the past month, and the pattern suggested that enemy forces knew exactly when and where the supplies would be most vulnerable. Captain Wu Jin studied the attack reports and suspected that someone was feeding information to the Krillians, but the alien command insisted that the attacks were just bad luck. Tai-Ho spent hours analyzing the attack patterns and locations on the tactical display in the unit's briefing room. While his alien teammates focused on the obvious details like firepower and casualty numbers, he looked at the timing and coordination of each ambush. What he found made his blood run cold. The enemy was not just stealing supplies. They were learning how the Galactic Defense Force operated. Each attack had been designed to capture specific types of equipment and information. The first convoy that was hit carried communication gear, the second had tactical computers, and the third was transporting officers with high-level security clearances. The Krillians were systematically gathering intelligence about galactic military procedures and using each successful ambush to plan even more effective attacks. When Tai-Ho presented his analysis to Captain Wu Jin, the experienced officer immediately understood the implications. The enemy was not just winning random battles, they were preparing for something much bigger by learning everything they could about how the different alien species worked together in combat. The rigid adherence to standard procedures that made the galactic military so efficient was being turned into a weapon against them. The next major supply mission was scheduled to carry medical supplies and ammunition to a forward base near the front lines. The convoy would include vehicles from 3 different species and follow standard security protocols that had been used successfully for months. But Tai-Ho noticed several details in the mission briefing that did not match the previous reports. The route had been changed at the last minute, and several key defensive positions had been reassigned to different units. During the pre-mission briefing, Tai-Ho tried to point out the inconsistencies, but the alien officers dismissed his concerns as typical human paranoia. The Draknari logistics commander said that humans always saw conspiracies where none existed, and the Telfari intelligence officer insisted that their security protocols were foolproof. But Captain Wu Jin had learned to trust his human soldiers' instincts, even when the alien command structure disagreed. The convoy consisted of 12 vehicles carrying essential supplies for the forward base, and was protected by 2 squads of mixed-species soldiers, including Tai-Ho's unit. The route led through a narrow canyon that was known to be dangerous, but was still the fastest way to reach their destination. Tai-Ho rode in the lead scout vehicle and used every sensor and visual scanning technique he had learned to watch for signs of enemy preparation as they entered the canyon. Tai-Ho spotted the first indicators that an ambush was waiting. The rocks along the ridgelines had been disturbed recently, and there were small reflections that could be weapon sights or observation equipment. His alien squad mates could not see what he was pointing out, because their enhanced sensors showed no obvious threats. But Tae-ho had learned to read terrain like a human hunter, looking for signs that technology might miss. The attack began exactly as Tae-ho had predicted, with plasma fire erupting from concealed positions along both sides of the canyon. The convoy found itself trapped in a carefully prepared kill zone with no easy escape routes. The alien soldiers responded according to their training, by taking defensive positions and calling for air support. That would take at least 15 minutes to arrive, but Tae-ho could see that they would all be dead long before any help could reach them, while Gorak set up his heavy weapons and Nixis tried to spot enemy positions with her enhanced vision. Tae-ho was already moving. He had identified the key weaknesses in the enemy ambush during his analysis of the previous attacks and knew exactly where the Krillian commander would position himself. The aliens had planned for a conventional Galactic response, but they had not anticipated someone who could think like they did. Using the noise and confusion of the battle to cover his movement, Tae-ho slipped away from the convoy and began working his way up the canyon wall the enemy had positioned. Sentries to watch for flanking attempts, but they were looking for alien soldiers who moved in predictable patterns and used standard equipment. Tae-ho moved like a human guerrilla fighter, using every shadow and piece of cover to remain invisible. He climbed toward the enemy positions. Tae-ho could hear his alien squad mates calling for him on the radio, but he could not answer without giving away his location. The Krillians had positioned themselves perfectly to destroy the convoy. But they had made the same mistake his former squad leader had made. They assumed humans would behave in predictable ways. The young cadet who had been left for dead was about to show them how wrong they were. Tae-ho reached the ridgeline just as the enemy commander was preparing to call in reinforcements to finish off the trapped convoy. The Krillian officer was exactly where Tae-ho had expected him to be, positioned at the highest point where he could coordinate the entire ambush. The alien warrior was focused on the battle below and did not notice the human soldier approaching from behind until it was too late. The combat knife that Tae-ho had made from salvaged metal during his survival in the jungle slid between the Krillian commander's armor plates with surgical precision. One quick strike eliminated the enemy leader before he could sound an alarm or call for backup. Tae-ho quickly stripped the body of weapons and communication equipment, then began moving toward the next target on his mental list. The enemy heavy weapons position was located on a rocky outcrop that gave them perfect fields of fire down into the canyon, but also made them isolated from the rest of the ambush. Forced, Tae-ho approached from their blind spot using techniques he had learned studying both human and alien stealth methods. The 3 Krillian soldiers manning the plasma cannon never saw him coming. Instead of attacking the enemy soldiers directly, Tae-ho sabotaged their weapon by removing a crucial component from the power coupling system. When the gunners tried to fire their next volley, the plasma cannon overloaded and exploded, taking out not only the weapon crew, but also destroying their entire position. The explosion echoed through the canyon and caused confusion among the other enemy forces, who did not understand what had happened. Moving like a ghost through the rocky terrain, Tae-ho systematically dismantled the ambush from within. His next target was the communication relay that the Krillians were using to coordinate with other enemy units. A few precisely placed charges made from their own ammunition supplies destroyed the equipment and cut off the ambush team from any outside support. Down in the convoy, Captain Wu Jin realized what was happening when the enemy fire began to slacken and become uncoordinated. Instead of the disciplined crossfire that had pinned them down, the Krillian positions were now firing randomly and without proper targeting. The experienced human officer understood that someone was disrupting the enemy from behind their own lines. Gorak, the Dreknari heavy weapons specialist, was amazed when he saw explosions blooming along the ridge line where the enemy positions had been moments before. He had assumed that Tae-ho had been killed early in the ambush because the human had disappeared from his fighting position, but now it seemed like their missing teammate was single-handedly destroying an entire enemy force. Nixis used her enhanced Telfari vision to track the secondary explosions and movement along the canyon rim. What she saw changed her opinion of human capabilities forever. The small figure moving between enemy positions was using a combination of stealth techniques that no single species should have been able to master. Tai-Ho was fighting like a Telfari scout, moving like a Draknari commando, and thinking like a human guerrilla all at the same time. When the enemy communication system went dead, the remaining Krillian soldiers began to panic without coordination. They could not maintain their ambush positions, and some began retreating toward predetermined rally points. But Tai-Ho had studied the previous attacks and knew exactly where those rally points would be located. He reached each position ahead of the retreating enemies and turned their own escape routes into death traps. The final phase of the battle lasted less than 10 minutes as Captain Wu Jin coordinated his remaining forces for a counterattack. The Krillian ambush team found themselves caught between the convoy they had been trying to destroy and the human soldier who had appeared behind their lines like an avenging spirit. Their perfect trap had become their own tomb. When the fighting ended, Tai-Ho had eliminated 12 enemy soldiers and captured their field intelligence officer alive. The prisoner carried detailed information about Krillian infiltration networks and plans for future attacks. More importantly, the intelligence revealed that the enemy had been studying galactic military doctrine for months, preparing for a major offensive that would exploit the predictable nature of alien warfare as Tai-Ho climbed down from the ridgeline covered in dust and enemy blood. His alien squadmates stared at him with a mixture of respect and fear. The same soldiers who had mocked human weakness just hours before now understood that they had been completely wrong about what humans could accomplish in combat. The young cadet who had been abandoned and left for dead had just saved their lives and changed the course of the war. Captain Wu Jin helped Tai-Ho down the last few meters of rocky slope and could see that the young soldier was exhausted from his solo assault on the enemy positions. But there was something else in Tai-Ho's eyes, a cold satisfaction that came from proving that humans deserved to be treated as equals in this galactic conflict. The underestimated species had just demonstrated why they should never be written off as expendable. News of Tai-Ho's single-handed destruction of the Krillian ambush spread through the Galactic Defense Force faster than official reports could travel. Soldiers throughout the sector were talking about the human cadet who had turned a certain massacre into a stunning victory. The same alien officers who had dismissed humans as weak and unreliable began sending requests for human personnel to be assigned to their units. Lieutenant Colonel Park Min-ho found himself dealing with demands from multiple sector commands, all wanting access to soldiers who could think outside the rigid tactical frameworks that governed galactic warfare. The military bureaucracy was slowly beginning to understand that human unpredictability was not a weakness to be corrected but a strategic advantage to be exploited. But success brought problems that Tai-Ho had never expected or wanted. He was promoted to corporal and assigned to an elite reconnaissance unit, tasked with the most dangerous missions behind enemy lines. His new alien teammates treated him with respect but also with a wariness that made normal military relationships almost impossible. They expected him to perform miracles in every combat situation. The Telfari scout who joined the unit studied Tai-Ho's movement techniques, obsessively trying to understand how a human could move through hostile territory better than her own species, which had evolved for stealth and reconnaissance. The Draknari heavy weapons specialist asked detailed questions about human combat psychology, wanting to know how someone so small could be so effective against larger and stronger enemies. Sergeant Lee Hai-jin noticed the changes in Tai-Ho during his medical evaluations and became worried about the pressure he was facing. The young soldier had never sought fame or recognition. He had simply refused to die when others expected him to fail. But now the entire military structure was treating him as a symbol of human potential and expecting him to represent his entire species in every action he took. The elite unit was commanded by Captain Yoon Sang-ho, a veteran Special Forces officer who had been fighting in the Galactic War for 12 years. Sang-ho had read all of Tai-Ho's files and understood both the potential and the problems that came with having such a famous soldier under his command. During their first meeting, he made it clear that the unit would succeed or fail as a team, not based on any individual heroics. Their first major mission came when a Galactic Defense Force research station stopped responding to communications in the contested Vega system. Intelligence reports suggested that the facility had been overrun by enemy forces, but the research data stored there was too valuable to abandon. A traditional military assault would be too costly, so Command decided to send Sang-Ho's small unit to infiltrate and recover the information. The research station orbited a gas giant in a system that had changed hands multiple times during the war. Long-range sensors showed the facility was intact but completely silent, with no life signs detectable through its defensive shielding. Enemy patrol ships maintained a loose perimeter around the station, suggesting they were either using it as a base or setting another trap. Captain Sang-Ho briefed his team on the mission parameters, but made it clear that they would have to adapt their plans based on what they found at the station. The facility contained research data about advanced weapon systems that could change the balance of power in the war, but it might also contain enemy forces waiting in ambush. Tae-ho studied the intelligence reports and noticed several details that suggested the situation was more complex than a simple enemy occupation. The research staff had been working on classified projects that even he did not have clearance to know about, and the facility had multiple levels of security that would be difficult for enemy forces to breach quickly. As their ship approached the research station using stealth technology, borrowed from 3 different alien species, Tae-ho realized that this mission would test everything he had learned about combat and survival. The young soldier who had started as an abandoned cadet was now responsible for a mission that could determine the outcome of the entire Galactic War. The team consisted of 6 soldiers from 4 different species, each bringing unique skills and perspectives to the mission. But Tae-ho knew that success would depend on more than just individual abilities. They would need to work together in ways that the rigid galactic military structure had never anticipated and trust each other with their lives in situations where traditional tactics might not be enough. As they prepared to board the silent research station, Tae-ho felt the weight of expectations from every human in the galactic military, but he also remembered the lessons he had learned during his week alone in the alien jungle. Sometimes the greatest strength came from simply refusing to give up no matter how impossible the situation seemed. The research station hung in space like a dead whale surrounded by the swirling clouds of the gas giant below. Captain Sang-Ho's team approached using a salvaged shuttle with its identification codes changed to match a supply vessel that the Krillians had captured weeks earlier. The enemy patrol ships paid no attention to what appeared to be a routine cargo delivery, but Tae-ho noticed that their formation was designed to respond to threats coming from outside the system, not from within. Once aboard the station, the team discovered that something had gone terribly wrong with the Krillian occupation. The corridors were empty, but showed signs of fierce fighting between the research staff and enemy forces. Blast marks on the walls and emergency bulkheads sealed throughout the facility suggested that the human scientists and technicians had put up much stronger resistance than anyone had expected. Tae-ho studied the damage patterns and realized that the research staff had used the station's own systems against their attackers. Emergency doors had been turned into choke points, defensive turrets had been reprogrammed to target enemy forces, and even the life support systems had been weaponized to create zones that were hostile to Krillian biology. The humans had turned their workplace into a fortress using nothing but creativity and desperate determination. As the team moved deeper into the station, they encountered automated defense systems that had been jury-rigged by the research staff. These improvised weapons showed the same kind of creative adaptation that Tae-ho had used during his own survival, the ability to take standard equipment and make it do things the original designers had never intended. But the defenses were failing as enemy forces systematically broke through each barrier. In the central laboratory complex, they found evidence of a desperate last stand. Research equipment had been arranged into defensive positions, and the walls were scarred by weapons, fire from both sides. The Krillians had eventually overwhelmed the defenders, but it had cost them heavily in casualties and time. Most importantly, the research data had been secured behind multiple layers of protection that the enemy had not yet been able to breach. Dr. Kim Soo-jin, the lead researcher, was barely alive when they found her in the central data vault. She had been defending the core research files for 4 days, using every weapon she could improvise and every trick she had learned from studying military tactics. The information she protected contained detailed intelligence about Krillian capabilities and plans for a massive offensive that would overwhelm current galactic defense lines. The doctor was unconscious from blood loss and exhaustion, but she had managed to activate a dead man switch that would destroy all the research data if the wrong person tried to access it. Captain Sang-ho realized that they would need to extract both the researcher and the data, but enemy forces were converging on their position from multiple directions. Their small team was about to be outnumbered by at least 10-1. As Krillian soldiers sealed off escape routes and began their final assault on the data vault, Sang-ho made the most difficult decision of his military career. He activated his emergency communicator and sent out a call for reinforcements, knowing that any rescue force would face overwhelming odds. The message went out over military channels with a simple, "Request immediate assistance required for extraction of critical personnel and intelligence." What happened next became legend throughout the Galactic Defense Force. Human units from across the sector responded to the call without waiting for official authorization. Ship commanders who had never met Sang-ho or his team volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The response was immediate and overwhelming as human forces throughout the region abandoned their current assignments and rushed toward the research station. Commander Park Ji-woo of the destroyer Incheon was the first to respond, followed closely by Captain Lee Min-jung, commanding a squadron of fighters from the carrier Seoul transport ships, medical vessels, and even a few privately owned craft joined the impromptu rescue fleet as word spread through human military networks. The alien command structure watched in amazement as their newest member species demonstrated a principle that older civilizations had forgotten: no one gets left behind. The battle for the research station lasted 6 hours as human forces fought their way through enemy defenses that had been designed to stop much larger and more conventional attacks. The Krillians found themselves facing opponents who used tactics they had never encountered before: ships that attacked from impossible angles, soldiers who refused to retreat when logic said they should, and coordinated assaults that ignored every rule of civilized warfare. Tae-ho and his team held their position in the data vault, while the rescue operation unfolded around them. Dr. Kim Soo-jin regained consciousness long enough to help them access the research files before collapsing again from her injuries. The intelligence they recovered revealed the full scope of Krillian preparations for their final offensive, including detailed plans for attacks on major galactic worlds. When the rescue ships finally reached the research station, Tae-ho carried the unconscious researcher to safety while his teammates protected the extracted data. The young soldier who had been abandoned by his alien squad mates months earlier now watched as dozens of human vessels risked everything to ensure that no one was left behind. The principle that had kept him alive in the alien jungle had become the rallying cry for his entire species. As their ship jumped to hyperspace with the rescued personnel and critical intelligence, Tae-ho realized that his survival had been about more than just refusing to die. It had been the beginning of a fundamental change in how humanity viewed its role in the galactic community. The cadet who had been left for dead had become a symbol of why no human should ever be abandoned, and his story inspired soldiers throughout the galaxy to prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes from simply refusing to give up. The intelligence recovered from the research station allowed galactic forces to prepare for and ultimately defeat the Krillian offensive. But the real victory was in how the rescue operation changed relationships between human and alien forces. The species that had once been dismissed as weak and expendable had demonstrated that they possessed something the galaxy desperately needed: the willingness to risk everything for their comrades and the stubborn determination to succeed against impossible odds.